Right after a brutal Rocky Mountain storm, a tiny mountain lion cub lay trapped in a stone crevice, seconds away from being torn apart by 10 circling crows. But when Ranger Lucas risked his life to save it, he had no idea a darker truth was closing in. An injured adult cougar, a hungry wolf pack, and a tragedy nature had already set in motion. The storm had passed only an hour earlier, but the mountains were still dripping with the cold breath of rain. A thin mist clung to the ridgelines of the Colorado Rockies, drifting in and out like silent ghosts. Ranger Lucas Hart moved carefully along a narrow ledge, boot soles slick with a muddy mix of granite dust and melting hail. His radio crackled weakly on his shoulder, static, broken by a distant voice from the main station asking for updates on trail damage, search and rescue conditions, and potential hazards for hikers and wildlife. It was the kind of morning where anything could go wrong. And something already had. A sharp cry echoed up from the ravine below, thin and desperate, the kind that didn't belong to wind or water. Lucas froze. At first, he thought it might be a rabbit trapped under fallen debris, or a marmot caught between rocks after the rain loosened half the mountainside. But then he heard it again, a trembling, breathless rasp, a sound too small to be a threat, too raw to be ignored. He stepped closer to the edge and pushed aside a low pine branch. What he saw tightened every muscle in his body. A tiny mountain lion cub, no heavier than a newborn house cat, was wedged deep in a narrow fracture between two slabs of stone. Its tawny fur was soaked through, pinned flat against its fragile frame. One paw twitched helplessly, scraping at the rock, failing to get traction. The cub's sides shuddered with shallow, uneven breaths. It had clearly been thrown or washed into the gap when the rain loosened the ridge. But the cub wasn't alone. 10 crows circled above the crevice, their wings cutting dark strokes through the washed-out air. They landed one by one on the surrounding rocks, forming an ominous ring of black feathers and glittering eyes. They hopped closer, testing, calculating. The largest crow, a glossy, broad-winged bird, let out a harsh call, the kind that traveled straight down a person's spine. It took a bold step forward, head cocked, waiting for the cub to weaken just a little more. Lucas's stomach dropped. Mountain lions were fierce, born survivors, apex predators of the American West. But this one was barely weeks old, small enough that the crows saw it not as a threat, but as an opportunity. He tapped his radio. "Mia, do you copy? I've got a situation here." Static answered him, then a faint voice. "What kind of situation?" He swallowed. 10 crows surrounding a cub in a rock fracture. The little one's fading fast." Mia cursed softly. "I'm 10 minutes out. Don't do anything stupid. Those rocks are unstable after the storm." But Lucas was already moving. Not fast, not reckless. Just with the heavy certainty that if he didn't act now, there wouldn't be anything left to save. He lowered himself onto the ledge, hands gripping the wet granite. Every shift of weight made the rock groan under him. Below, the cub gave a weak cry, then sagged, its tiny head dropping against the stone. The alpha crow suddenly flared its wings and dove. Lucas reacted on instinct. He threw his arm out and yelled, the sound echoing across the canyon. The crow veered off with a furious shriek. The others flapped back, unsettled but not defeated. They paced along the surrounding rocks like dark sentinels, waiting for their moment to reclaim the ledge. Lucas edged lower, heart pounding. "Hang in there, little one," he muttered. "I'm coming." He reached the fracture, bracing one knee on a jut of stone. With careful fingers, he pried at the narrow opening. The cub whimpered faintly, its head lolling. Lucas could see now that one side of its face was bruised, and the fur along its ribs was scraped raw. It had been battered hard by the fall or by debris in the storm. Behind him, wings fluttered. The crows hopped closer again. "Not happening," Lucas growled. He used his jacket to shield the cub as he reached into the gap. The tiny body was icy cold, trembling in short bursts. When he lifted it, the cub's weight shocked him. So light he could barely feel it in his hands, like lifting a bundle of soggy leaves. It let out a fragile, broken sound before going limp again. A sharp crack split the air. Lucas's gaze snapped downward. The ledge under him had shifted. A long fracture crawled across the rock beneath his left foot, widening with a low grinding noise. "Lucas!" Mia's voice rang from above. "Don't move. The ledge is unstable." "Yeah," he whispered. "I figured that out." The crack deepened. Pebbles tumbled over the edge. The crows scattered upward with startled caws as the rock trembled violently. Lucas clutched the cub to his chest and tried to lean back toward the main ledge, but the granite sheared forward with a sudden lurch. The world dropped for a terrifying, weightless instant. Lucas and the cub were falling, the ravine yawning open beneath them. Then a hand clamped around his wrist, a fierce, desperate grip. Mia. Her boots skidded against the wet stone as she anchored herself, teeth clenched. "I've got you. Don't let go." The cub whimpered weakly against Lucas's shirt. The crows circled overhead, screeching wildly as if the mountain itself had opened its mouth to swallow them all. The ledge continued to crumble. Mia strained, arms shaking. "Lucas, pull yourself up now." With the cub held tight against him, Lucas kicked against the collapsing rock, using every ounce of strength he had left. His boots scraped for purchase, slipped, scraped again, and finally caught on a small ridge. He pushed upward while Mia hauled backward with all her weight. A final surge, and then they were safe, collapsing onto solid ground just as the entire ledge thundered loose and crashed into the ravine below. Lucas lay flat on his back, chest heaving, rainwater dripping from his hair. The cub lay curled against him, trembling faintly but alive. Mia leaned over him, breathing hard, eyes wide. "Lucas, that was insane." He looked down at the small, soaked creature in his arms. Its eyes fluttered weakly, barely able to open. "No," he said quietly. "What would have been insane is leaving it there." The surviving crows perched on a dead tree nearby, watching silently, almost resentful that the story hadn't ended the way nature intended. The wind swept across the ridge, cold and rising again, hinting that the storm wasn't finished after all. And the fragile cub, whose life now depended on the thinnest thread of hope, let out one more shivering breath against Lucas's chest. Wind swept across the ridge in sharp, cold bursts as Lucas pushed himself upright, still breathing hard. The mountain lion cub lay pressed against his jacket, its tiny ribs fluttering like a trapped bird's wings. Mia crouched beside him, hands still trembling from the effort of pulling both of them back from the ledge. The storm clouds gathered again overhead, heavy with the promise of more trouble. Nothing about the morning felt stable. Not the weather, not the rocks, not the fragile life Lucas held in his arms. "We need to get off this ridge," Mia said, glancing at the sky. "Another burst of rain hits. This whole stretch could go again." Lucas nodded, but his eyes stayed on the cub. The little creature's breaths were short and uneven. One paw hung limp, scraped to the bone. Its fur, matted with mud and rainwater, carried the faint smell of cold stone and desperation. The crows still perched nearby, feathers puffed in irritation, as if waiting for nature to resume its course. "I'm not leaving it here," Lucas said quietly. "I didn't ask you to," Mia replied. "But you need to move." She stood and scanned the terrain, choosing a safer path back down the slope. Lucas pushed to his feet, wincing when his knee buckled slightly. He'd slammed it against the rock during the fall. But he tightened his grip on the cub, holding it close to his chest to shield it from the wind. Mia took the lead, stepping carefully across the soaked earth. Lucas followed, each footfall testing the ground before committing any weight. The cub gave a soft cry as he jostled it, so faint he almost missed it. He tightened his arm around the small body, whispering, "You're okay? I've got you." A sudden rustle made Mia snap her head to the right. "Lucas," she muttered, "we're not alone." At first, he didn't see it. Then, between two fallen pines, movement. A shape slipped through the shadows. Not another crow. Something heavier. He felt the cub stir weakly against him, as if sensing what they couldn't yet identify. A coyote stepped into view, its coat soaked and bristling, hunger sharp in its eyes. Storms drove predators down from higher slopes, pushing them closer to the trails in search of easy meals. And to a starving coyote, a half-conscious mountain lion cub carried by a distracted ranger looked like the easiest meal of all. Mia whispered, "We do not have time for this." The coyote took a careful step forward, nose twitching. Its gaze moved from Lucas to the cub. Its ribs showed through its wet fur, an animal pushed to the edge by weather and scarcity. Lucas recognized the look. Hunger made predators bold. "Back up slowly," Mia said. She reached toward her belt instinctively, but the radio, flashlight, and field kit were all she had. No pepper spray, no deterrent. Rangers weren't permitted to carry firearms in this section of protected land unless responding to an emergency. This was starting to feel like one. Lucas stopped moving. The coyote inched closer. The crows, sensing tension, erupted from their tree with a harsh flurry of wings, circling the scene as if drawn to conflict. The cub whimpered again, the sound thin and trembling. "Mia," Lucas murmured. "If it charges, you take the trail. I'll buy you time." "Like hell you will." He didn't look at her. "You know how fast they are when they're desperate." "So are you when you're stupid," she shot back. The coyote lowered itself, ready to spring. Lucas shifted his weight, bracing himself. His injured knee throbbed, his fingers numb from the cold, gripping rain. He felt the cub shiver in his jacket, tiny claws flexing weakly against his shirt, as though trying to cling to something, anything, alive. The coyote tensed. "Lucas," Mia whispered. "Now." But the mountain moved first. A distant crack of thunder rolled across the ridge, echoing through the ravine. The coyote jerked its head up, startled. Another rumble followed, closer this time, and then the first cold slashes of sleet fell from the sky. Within seconds, the ridge turned slick again, rocks darkening under the sudden downpour. The coyote hesitated. Hunger warred with survival instinct. But weather on the Rockies was not something even a starving predator took lightly. With a final frustrated growl, it backed away, vanishing between the pines as quickly as it had appeared. Mia let out a shaky breath. Thank God. Lucas exhaled slowly. His heart felt like it was pounding in his throat. "We need to get to the cabin," he said, "before this turns into a real storm." They pushed forward with renewed urgency. The wind roared, carrying the smell of wet pine and cold stone. The cub's head lolled against Lucas's chest, each breath small and fragile. He could feel its warmth fading through the fabric of his jacket, and a knot tightened in his stomach. A feeling he knew too well from past rescues. Not every injured animal survived. Not every story had a miracle ending. But he also knew something else. Walking away would have haunted him for the rest of his life. Sometimes compassion was the only thing standing between life and loss. A truth he'd learned long before he ever put on a ranger's uniform. As they descended the final stretch toward the ranger cabin, a small wooden shelter tucked between old-growth trees, Mia glanced back at him. "Lucas, you realize taking this cub in means we're responsible for whatever comes next?" "Yeah," he said softly. "I know." He looked down at the small bundle of trembling fur in his arms. "But I wasn't about to let nature write the ending for this one." The wind howled behind them as the sleet thickened, turning the forest path into a shifting blur of shadows, ice, and cold breath. And somewhere above, the surviving crows circled again, watching, not yet ready to abandon the tragedy they believed should have already been finished. By the time Lucas and Mia pushed through the door of the ranger cabin, the sleet had turned to a full-on snowstorm. Wind slammed against the wooden walls like an angry fist, rattling the window frames and sending fine dustings of snow blowing in under the door. The cabin lights flickered once, then steadied, humming softly with the strain of the aging generator. Lucas moved straight to the small table near the wood stove and laid the mountain lion cub down on a folded wool blanket. Its body felt frighteningly light in his hands, light in the way only a failing life ever felt. Mia locked the door behind them and shook the wet out of her hair. "I'll get towels and hot water, whatever we have." Her voice tried to stay steady, but she kept glancing at the cub as if unsure it would still be breathing the next time she looked. Lucas knelt beside the table and gently ran his fingers across the cub's side. Its breaths came shallow and uneven, each one a small fight. "Easy, little one," he whispered. "You've made it this far. Don't quit now." He wasn't sure if he said it for the cub or for himself. Mia returned with a stack of towels, a metal bowl of warm water, and a small first aid kit they kept on hand for wildlife rescues. She handed Lucas a towel. "Let's warm him up. Hypothermia is killing him faster than the injuries." Lucas nodded and wrapped the cub carefully, leaving just its face exposed. The cub gave a faint twitch, then fell still again. Its eyes fluttered but didn't open. He began rubbing gently along its spine, trying to stimulate blood flow the way wildlife rehabilitators had taught him during training. Back then, it had all been theoretical. Now, with a tiny life fading under his hands, it felt terrifyingly real. The storm outside intensified, the kind of mountain weather that appeared suddenly and swallowed entire trails. Snow blew horizontal past the window. The cabin lights flickered again. Mia shot a worried glance at them. "If the generator dies, we lose heat." Lucas didn't look up. "Then we keep him close to the stove, and we keep working." She hesitated. "I called the vet station again. No response. The storm must have knocked out service down the valley." "It was already barely holding earlier," Lucas murmured. "We're on our own." Mia moved to check the stove, feeding in more split logs. Flames crackled to life, warming the air around them. Lucas dipped a cloth in warm water and gently cleaned the mud and grit from the cub's face. The small creature winced once, a faint sign it could still feel pain. He took it as a good sign. Pain meant the body was still fighting. Hours passed in a slow, heavy rhythm, warming, rubbing, cleaning, waiting. The cub's breathing teetered on a knife's edge, sometimes strengthening for a moment before fading again. Mia brewed coffee, though neither of them touched it. They were too focused on the cub's fragile chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. In the lull between wind gusts, a strange quiet settled over the cabin. Snow muffled everything, sound, movement, even time. Lucas checked the cub's pulse again. Weak, very weak. "Lucas?" Mia's voice softened, almost hesitant. Be honest with me. Do you think he's going to make it? Lucas didn't answer right away. He stared at the little body wrapped in towels, the tiny ear twitching every few minutes as if fighting sleep. I don't know, he admitted finally. But I know he won't if we stop trying. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly, rare in snowstorms, but not unheard of in mountain weather. The sound vibrated through the wooden beams, reminding them both how isolated they were, how vulnerable. Suddenly, the cub's body convulsed once, sharply, then twice. Lucas leaned in, fear gripping his chest. Aspen? The name slipped out without him realizing. Aspen, like the trembling trees that clung stubbornly to life even in the harshest wind. The cub didn't respond. Its chest rose in a shallow breath, then didn't fall. Lucas waited. 1 second, 2, 3, nothing. Come on, not now, he whispered fiercely. Not yet. He pressed 2 fingers gently to the tiny chest, searching for a pulse. None. Lucas? Mia's voice trembled. What's happening? He didn't hesitate. Training took over. He cupped the cub's body in one hand and carefully pressed 2 fingers against its chest, delivering tiny compressions. Just enough pressure to imitate the rhythm of a living heart without crushing fragile ribs. Stay with me, he murmured. Don't quit. Not after everything. Mia stood frozen for a moment and then moved beside him, hands pressed over her mouth. The storm roared again, slamming against the cabin like a warning. The lights dimmed to a low glow. Lucas continued the compressions, steady, controlled, refusing to let panic disrupt the rhythm. After several tense seconds, a lifetime in the tiny space between breath and silence, the cub jerked under his hand and let out a thin gasp. Lucas exhaled shakily. There you go. Come back. That's it. Mia wiped a tear that had escaped down her cheek. For a second I thought we lost him. We almost did. Lucas wrapped the cub tighter, pulling it closer to the stove. But he's still here. The cub gave a faint, broken sound, curling slightly toward the heat. Its breathing remained fragile but steady enough to keep hope alive. Lucas stroked its head gently. You're a fighter, Aspen. Did you just name him? Mia asked, voice soft. He shrugged lightly. Seemed like the right time. Silence settled again, but this time it felt different. Less sharp, less threatening. The storm still raged, the lights still flickered, and the night outside remained bitter and unforgiving. But inside the cabin, warmth spread slowly through the air, wrapping around the tiny cub resting under the soft glow of the stove. Lucas leaned back in his chair, exhaustion pulling at his limbs. This night's not over, he murmured. But he made it through the worst of it. Mia pulled up a chair beside him. Then so will we. Outside, the wind screamed across the ridge, but the cabin held steady. And in the flickering firelight, the fragile rise and fall of Aspen's breath carried a small but undeniable promise. That sometimes, even in the darkest storms, life found a way to keep fighting. Morning came slowly, crawling over the Rockies in a pale wash of gray light. The storm had finally broken, leaving behind a world muffled in white. Fresh snow clinging to every pine needle, every boulder, every quiet contour of the forest. Inside the ranger cabin, the air still carried the lingering scent of wet wood, smoke, and the soft hum of the generator. Lucas had not slept. Mia hadn't either. But Aspen, small, bruised, and impossibly fragile, was still breathing, tucked inside a bundle of towels near the stove. Lucas leaned over the cub again, checking for the faint movement of its ribs. Stable for now. He exhaled in slow relief, and reached for the small syringe of warmed, diluted formula the vet station kept for orphaned wildlife. No phone connection meant no guidance. No access to professional advice from emergency services or wildlife insurance programs. They were improvising care with whatever training they had. Lucas tilted the syringe gently and placed a drop at the cub's mouth. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the tiny tongue moved, weak but deliberate. "Good boy," Lucas murmured. "That's it. Stay with us." Mia brought over a fresh towel warmed by the stove. "He's fighting, tougher than he looks." "He has to be," Lucas said. "Everything up here wants him gone." They fed Aspen drop by drop until the cub let out a faint sigh and nestled deeper into the blanket. It was the most life they'd seen in him since the fall. A first milestone, small but important. But as they exchanged relieved glances, a distant sound threaded through the silence outside. Soft, low, almost like a breath drawn through the trees. A growl. Mia stiffened. "Did you hear that?" Lucas did, and it wasn't the wind. He crossed the cabin and eased back the curtain on the frosted window. The forest stood silent in the morning light, until a shape moved between the trees. Large, fluid, purposeful. A mountain lion, full grown, stepped from the shadow of a fallen pine. Its coat was thick and dusted with snow, its shoulders powerful beneath the fur. It moved with the slow, deliberate grace of a predator, conserving energy after a long night. The cougar lifted its head, nose raised, breathing in the air. It was looking for something. Lucas felt the reality settle onto his chest like a weight. That might be Aspen's mother. Mia came to the window beside him. Or it might be a male. They'll kill unrelated cubs. The cougar paced once along the tree line before disappearing behind the slope. But the tension it left behind stayed inside the cabin like a cold draft. Lucas pulled the curtain closed. Either way, Aspen can't be exposed, not like this. For most of the morning, they alternated between tending to the cub and scanning the forest outside. Aspen showed tiny improvements. Small stretches, faint mews, moments when his eyes opened halfway. Each fragile sign of life brought a swell of hope. But every time the wind shifted and carried the faint echo of a growl, the hope tightened into worry. Later that afternoon, while Mia stacked more firewood by the stove, Lucas stepped outside to check the perimeter. The air was crisp, the snow crunching under his boots. He scanned for signs of movement, but found something else instead. Tracks, fresh ones. A wide paw print pressed into the snow near the base of a tree, followed by a line of impressions leading toward the ridge behind the cabin. Lucas crouched down and brushed the edge of the print with gloved fingers. "This is from this morning," he murmured. It circled the cabin. More prints appeared near the woodpile, closer, overlapping. The cougar had walked right up to the door. He swallowed hard and stood, scanning the trees again. Nothing moved now. The silence felt heavier. When Lucas went back inside, Mia wiped snow from her hands and studied his face. "You found something?" "Yes," he said quietly. "We're being watched." Even as he spoke, a sudden scraping sound echoed from the back wall of the cabin, followed by a deep, throaty growl. Mia jumped. Lucas moved instinctively toward Aspen, shielding the cub. The sound came again, closer this time, like claws dragging across wood. "This isn't good," Mia whispered. "Is it trying to get in?" Lucas shook his head. "It's looking for something familiar, a scent, a sound." He looked down at Aspen, who stirred at the noise, letting out a faint, pitiful mew. The response sent a chill down Lucas's spine. The cub wasn't just recovering. It was calling out, and something outside was listening. The growl faded after a few minutes, replaced by the soft padding of footsteps moving away through the snow. But neither Lucas nor Mia relaxed. The mountain lion had not come close by accident. The storm, the fall, the panic. It all pointed to one brutal possibility. Aspen's mother had been searching for her cub through the night, perhaps injured herself in the storm. Lucas checked Aspen again. The cub had curled tighter, trembling gently, as if remembering something it couldn't understand. He stroked the small head softly. "We'll figure this out," he whispered. "I promise." Near evening, when the wind died down and the light settled into a cold, blue dusk, Aspen showed another sign of improvement. He pushed himself upright for the first time, wobbly, shaky, but determined. Lucas immediately steadied him. "Easy there," he said, smiling for the first time all day. "You're tougher than half the folks who come through these mountains." Aspen blinked up at him, pupils uneven but focused. For a moment, the cub leaned into his hand, seeking warmth. It was a fragile, fleeting moment, but it sparked something warm in Lucas's chest. Then Aspen's ears twitched. His eyes widened with fear, tiny body stiffening in alert. Before Lucas could react, another sound drifted from outside. A deeper growl, louder this time, followed by the unmistakable thump of something heavy landing on the cabin's back porch. Maya's voice wavered. "Lucas, it's back." The cub's breathing quickened. Lucas moved toward the door, heart pounding, knowing what was waiting beyond the wood. The mountain lion wasn't just passing through now. It had returned, drawn by instinct, desperation, or something far more dangerous. As the final light slipped behind the mountains, a powerful silhouette passed by the fogged window. Aspen was no longer the only fragile life at risk. Something outside wanted answers, or vengeance, and it wasn't leaving until it got them. The cabin felt smaller than ever as night settled over the forest. Snow muted everything beyond the walls, turning the world outside into a cold, breathless void. Inside, the only light came from the fire, its glow flickering across the wooden floor and the tiny body curled in blankets near the stove. Aspen slept, exhausted from the effort of trying to stand earlier. But his rest was shallow, broken by twitching paws and soft, troubled breaths. Lucas sat beside him, one hand resting gently on the cub's back. Mia moved quietly near the window, peeking between the curtains every few minutes. The footsteps on the porch hadn't returned, not yet, but tension clung to the air like frost on glass. Mia exhaled slowly. "It's out there. I can feel it." Lucas nodded. Cougars don't abandon something they're searching for, not unless they're hurt or desperate. He didn't say what he feared most, that the cougar outside might not be Aspen's mother at all. A male pushed down the mountain by hunger might see a cub as competition, not kin. Nature didn't follow sentiment. It followed instinct. A gust of wind pressed snow against the door. Aspen stirred, letting out a weak, breathy mew. Mia's eyes tightened. "He's calling to it." Lucas lifted Aspen gently, letting the cub rest against his chest. He can't help it. He wants warmth, protection. Or he remembers something, Mia said softly. Something from before the storm. Before Lucas could answer, another noise rippled through the quiet night. Slow, deliberate steps, crunching through the snow. Lucas and Mia froze. The sound grew louder, then softer, pacing around the cabin in a wide arc. Snow brushed against the lower logs of the outer wall as something large leaned close, sniffing. A low growl vibrated through the boards. Aspen startled awake. His whole body stiffened, ears flattened, eyes wide. A soft cry escaped him. Not fear, not quite. Something between longing and confusion. Lucas held him closer. Easy, you're safe. But Mia stepped away from the window, her face pale. Lucas, I saw it clearly this time. The cougar has a limp. Its front shoulder, something's wrong. Lucas's breath caught. A storm injury, a fall, a wound. The kind of damage a mother might take trying to shield a cub or escape a landslide. He set Aspen down gently and gathered his jacket. Mia, stay with him. I'm going out. Mia grabbed his arm. Are you out of your mind? You walk out there, you won't make it back. He hesitated, but only for a heartbeat. If that's his mother, she's looking for him. If it's not, we need to know. Lucas, but another growl rolled through the night, deep and resonant. This time, it wasn't aggression. It sounded like mourning. Lucas opened the door just wide enough to slip outside. The cold hit him instantly, a sharp sting across his face. His boots sank into fresh snow as he stepped onto the porch. The forest stood motionless, dark outlines rising against the faint moonlight filtering through thinning clouds. Then he saw her. A cougar sat at the edge of the clearing, chest rising and falling with labored breaths. Snow clung to her fur, especially around a matted patch on her shoulder where dried blood stiffened the hair. She was beautiful, powerful but weakened. When she stood, her left leg buckled, forcing her to brace awkwardly against the cold ground. Lucas took one slow step forward. She growled softly, but it wasn't a warning. More a cry of pain. Her eyes locked onto him, golden and sharp despite exhaustion. Lucas recognized something unmistakable in that gaze. Fear, not of him, of loss. I know what you're looking for, he whispered into the wind. He's alive. He's inside. The cougar lifted her head sharply at the word alive, as if understanding the tone. She sniffed the air, muscles trembling. When she took a step toward the porch, she staggered. Lucas felt his heart twist. You're injured, badly. Behind him, the cabin door cracked open. Mia's silhouette appeared. Lucas, we have a problem. He turned. What now? Tracks, Mia said. Not hers. A second set, wolf tracks, big ones. Lucas swore under his breath. Wolves rarely came this close to the ranger station unless forced by scarcity. The storm had shifted everything: migration routes, hunting grounds, boundaries. Now predators collided where they normally avoided each other. And in the middle of it all, one fragile cub they weren't willing to lose. The cougar growled again, this time short and urgent. She sniffed the air toward the cabin, toward Aspen. Then she turned sharply toward the tree line, ears pricked. She sensed the wolves too. Mia whispered, Lucas, this is turning into a disaster. He knew she was right. They had a mountain lion mother too injured to reclaim her cub, wolves closing in, and a tiny cub who could barely stand. They needed to get off the mountain as soon as the road cleared, but it hadn't yet. A sudden, sharp howl tore through the cold air. Close. Too close. The cougar tensed, baring her teeth. Lucas stepped back toward the door. Inside, now. As soon as they shut the door, Aspen let out a soft cry, recognizing the tension. The sound made the cougar outside pace, her growl vibrating against the cabin walls. She wanted her cub, but the wolves wanted something else entirely. Mia's voice shook. Lucas, can we keep him safe another night? Lucas looked down at Aspen, who leaned unsteadily against his palm. We don't have a choice, he said. But tomorrow, we're getting him off this mountain. He didn't say the fear that burned in his chest. If tomorrow even comes. Outside, the wolves howled again, closer. The cougar answered with a ragged roar, The night was no longer quiet. It was a battleground gathering its breath, and Aspen was the reason every predator in the forest was stirring. Dawn came with a strange stillness, as if the entire mountain were holding its breath. The night of growls, circling wolves, and the injured cougar pacing outside had finally given way to a pale, fragile light. Snow lay untouched across the clearing, smooth as porcelain. Even the air felt suspended. Lucas stepped outside the cabin cautiously, breath forming white clouds in the cold air. The prints from the wolves had frozen solid overnight. The cougar's tracks circled the porch, then drifted away toward the tree line, almost as if she had kept watch until sunrise, guarding the cabin from whatever hunted behind her. Mia joined him, arms wrapped around herself. "The plows made it through the main road," she said, relief trembling beneath her voice. "We've got a window. If we're going to take Aspen to the sanctuary, it's now." Lucas nodded. He felt the weight of the moment press into his chest. Aspen was breathing better but still weak, legs trembling every time he tried to stand, eyes unfocused and slow to react. The cub couldn't survive another night like the last. Wolves, weather, hunger. Every danger on the mountain seemed drawn to the cabin by instinct or desperation. And the cougar, injured, searching, had been pushed beyond her limit, wandering the ridge in pain. They gathered their supplies quickly. Lucas wrapped Aspen in a soft blanket and held him close, feeling the small heartbeat tapping faintly against his palm. "You're going to be okay," he whispered. "Just hold on a little longer." Within minutes, they were in the ranger truck, tires crunching through the wet snow as they began the 2-hour drive toward the Colorado Wildlife Sanctuary. Aspen lay tucked safely in a padded crate, head resting on the corner, eyes drifting in and out of awareness. Mia kept glancing back at him, her concern etched into every line of her face. "You did everything right," she said softly to Lucas. "Whatever happens next, he's alive because of you." Lucas didn't answer. Instead, he focused on the twisting mountain road ahead, where sunlight glimmered off melting snow. But he couldn't shake the memory of the cougar limping through the trees. Her wounded shoulder, her hollow growl, the desperate posture of a mother who'd lost something she was willing to fight wolves and storms to reclaim. When they reached the sanctuary, the staff moved fast. A technician lifted Aspen gently, checking his pulse and temperature. Another prepared warming pads and a medical kit. The director, a silver-haired woman named Dr. Margaret Hale, approached with a calm, reassuring presence. "You brought him just in time," she said, examining the cub with careful hands. "He's dehydrated, malnourished, and the head trauma is significant. But he's responsive. That's a good sign." Lucas exhaled in relief. But then Margaret's tone changed, softened, deepened. "And there's something you both need to see." She led them through a quiet hallway toward the recovery wing, stopping in front of a room separated by reinforced glass. Inside, on a thick layer of straw, lay a full-grown mountain lion. Her coat was brushed and clean now, but the wound on her shoulder was unmistakable. Bandaged, freshly treated, her breathing was slow, heavy, but steady. Lucas felt his heart start to pound. Mia whispered, "That's her, isn't it?" Margaret nodded. She was found 3 days ago at the base of a landslide, likely caught in the same storm that displaced the cub. She was severely dehydrated and in shock. We managed to stabilize her, but... Margaret paused. "She's been restless since she woke up, calling out, searching the corners of the enclosure, as if something is missing." Lucas stepped closer to the glass. The cougar lifted her head, slowly, painfully, and stared right at him. Her golden eyes were full of exhaustion, but beneath the haze, there was the unmistakable spark of recognition. The same eyes he'd seen watching his cabin under moonlight. The same soul who'd limped through the snow and circled the porch, never giving up. The mother. Margaret motioned toward a small gap in the wall between the two recovery rooms. A controlled channel for scent exchange, used for bonding or reuniting rescued wildlife. We activated this after she woke up. She scented something familiar almost immediately. We didn't know what it was. Until you arrived with the cub. Lucas swallowed, emotion swelling in his chest. Can we let them sense each other? Margaret nodded and signaled the technician. A small sliding panel opened between the rooms, allowing airflow while keeping them physically separated for safety. Lucas carried Aspen closer, holding the cub gently. Aspen let out a soft, weary mew, barely a sound at all. The reaction on the other side of the glass was instant. The mother's head jerked up, her ears pricked forward. She pulled herself upright, unsteady but urgent, and let out a low, trembling call, a sound filled with longing, recognition, and heartbreak. Aspen responded with a weak cry, lifting his head toward the panel. Mia pressed a hand to her mouth. My God, he knows her. The mother stepped as close as her injuries allowed, pressing her forehead near the panel, breathing deeply, her body shaking with emotion. Aspen pushed toward the scent, stretching out his tiny paw. Every person in the room fell silent, watching the fragile exchange between two lives torn apart by the mountain, and now stitched together again by sheer miracle. Margaret's voice was soft. They'll be housed side by side once the cub is stable. We can't reunite them physically until they're both strong enough, but this is the best possible outcome. Lucas nodded, a tight ache in his throat. He rested Aspen against his chest, letting the cub listen to the faint sound of his mother's breathing on the other side of the wall. I almost lost him, Lucas whispered. If we'd been minutes later. Margaret looked him in the eye. If you'd been minutes later, we would have lost both of them. He stared at the glass, at the mother struggling to stay upright just to keep her face near the opening where her cub's scent drifted through. The terrifying truth settled slowly into his bones. The storm hadn't just separated them. It had nearly ended an entire bloodline. Mother alone in a landslide, cub alone in a rock fracture, each dying in different corners of the mountain, each calling out in ways no one was meant to hear, until he did. Aspen let out another tiny cry and nestled into Lucas's jacket, exhausted. Lucas brushed a hand along the cub's back. You're safe now, he murmured. He wasn't sure if he was speaking to Aspen or the mother behind the glass, maybe to both. Over the next hour, the sanctuary team set up a pair of adjoining enclosures, 2 rooms separated only by a reinforced barrier with scent ports, so mother and cub could sense one another while they healed. Lucas and Mia stayed until Aspen finally fell into a deep, peaceful sleep. When they stepped outside, the sun was slipping behind the Rockies, turning the snow into a field of soft gold. The storm residue had cleared. Everything smelled of pine, cold air, and quiet hope. Mia nudged him gently. You know you're coming back next week, right? Lucas smiled. Yeah, I think I will. As they walked toward the truck, Lucas glanced back at the sanctuary. In the window, 2 silhouettes lay resting near the shared wall. One small, one strong despite its wounds. 2 lives saved, 2 stories rewritten. And far above the sanctuary, a single crow circled the evening sky, crying out once before gliding across the fading light, almost as if acknowledging the ending that never happened.